Bible, monotheism is an entity used by Freemasons in order to communicate with one another. And as I bring this slide up right now, I'm going to show you what they're talking about. Okay, so when we talk about supplanting, right? To supplant, they're talking about genetic engineering. Now, why is this important? I'm not being racist. Let me pull up the damn article. This right here is from Molecular Biology and Evolution. And this clearly states that if you are not a descendant, it says if your heritage is non-African, you are part Neanderthal. Now, the number specifically is you are 93% human and 7% Neanderthal. Caucasians come from Dravidians. So when we talk about white people coming from albinos, here's the problem. They don't come from African albinos, or Caucasoids, I should say. Don't come from African albinos. This man over here on the left is an African albino. You can clearly still see he's an African. This man right here, which kind of looks like you but has blonde hair, comes from this albino Dravidian. So everybody just looking at this picture would think that this is a white man. This is not a white man. This is an albino Dravidian. So basically, everybody knows who Dr. Shiva is. This is Dr. Shiva if he was an albino. Now, I'm going to tell you why that's important. When we're dealing with science, we know from Basic Science 101, two separate species cannot sexually reproduce, or they're called hybrids. So we coming back to Jacob, aka Yaakov, which is a Hebrew word for supplant. And there's a story, and I'm going by, your history. There's a story.
What was the mark that God put on Cain? The mark of Cain, dragon men, vampires, and the serpent seed coming up. I present to you a wild theory, not meant to be theology, but lots of interesting patterns and tie-ins here. Dragons are worshipped all over the world, and the constellation Draco is also known as Dracu in some cultures. So the word Dracula actually means dragon man, is known for fangs, bloodlust, extended lifespan, being a creature of the night, and cold-blooded. The punishment for Cain was twofold. He was driven from the face of the earth, and he was given a mark. Also being told to wander. Were fangs and vampirism the mark of Cain? Let's dive deep. Vampires are known for having fangs and bloodlust. Cain was a murderer. He took the life and the blood of another. So by God giving him fangs and making him look like a chimeric predator, someone who's out to take life and take blood, men certainly would have been scared of him and wanted to kill him. Also, he was driven from the face of the earth. The face of the earth is a place, just as the heart of the earth is a place, which is probably inside the earth, and the face is probably this top layer here of the realm. Think how in Aquaman here, when they're talking about the surface dwellers and those who dwell on the surface, that's the face of the earth. You even see the word face and surface. So there's this whole lineage possibly that was driven from the surface, from the face of the earth, that built cities either underground, possibly even underwater, giving rise to the Atlantis underwater culture myth, or even the first pirate civilizations or beings that come from the sea, although I have another theory on that. Vampires are known for being creatures of the night. They're driven from the face of the earth during the day because they can't be in the sun, so they have to come out during the night. Living in caves or inside like a city needing lights. Interestingly enough, the origin of the city builders are Cain and Cain's lineage. The first city was named Enoch. I wonder if Tenochtitlan, with the name Enoch right there in the middle, is one of those cities. Inside with artificial light, only coming out at night, kind of sounds like a city, which is actually the gateway into the full-fledged matrix. Snakes are also known for having fangs. The serpent seed of man, the dragon man with fangs, the vampire, the mark of Cain possibly. A lot of the ancestors of Cain also wrestled with bloodlust. Check out Lamech's song about bragging about offing people. Kind of like when it says in the Bible, when God gets to a point where he turns people over to their sins. Also, vampires are known for having an extended lifespan. The Bible says that there's life in the blood. And the whole drinking blood thing kind of might tie in with that. It also really ties in with a false counterfeit communion, if you think about it. Also, the etymology for Dracula actually does mean son of the dragon or son of the devil. Check it out. And Vlad the Impaler, who was Dracula, was in the Order of the Dragon. Just one of many references, and lots of cultures who are dragon worshipping and serpentine worshipping cultures. Also, hell is said to be filled with worms. Snakes are sometimes in the form of the Illuminati worm or the full-blown dragon. The Dragon Man. In fact, you can't even say a certain word on here that starts with an R or else. The whole Bible is the story of two seeds, the serpent seed versus the seed of the woman, which is the lineage the Messiah would come from, who in this picture that you see behind me, crushing the heel of the serpent, which is going to be the ultimate destiny. The serpent will bruise the heel, but he will crush the head of the serpent. Also, an interesting thread is the mark of Cain, then how Cain was the enemy, and Canaan was wicked, and the Canaanites were Israel's enemies, and finally, the mark of the beast, which will be a renewed mark of Cain. Future video plug on the mark of the beast. So after thinking about this, when I looked it up, this theory actually exists, and exists in lore, such as Legacy of Cain Defiance, and Vampire the Masquerade, which all have the common thread of the Nosferatu being Cain, or the devil, or the son of the devil, the whole serpent seed pattern. Perhaps some of the elite are the serpent seed, have breakaway civilizations, live extended lifespans, are in charge of lots of things, have cities elsewhere, ingest certain things to have extended lifespans, and have relationships with off-world entities. More mysteries to ponder. See you next time on The Savage Truth.
So what it's saying here is the mark of Cain is to have leprous, sickly, white skin.
I've often said that the story of Cain and Abel is one of my favorite stories in the Bible, right next to the story of Job. But I should also say that it's the most important story in the Bible, because all evil and wickedness in the hearts of men start with Cain. And all the problems we have in the world are because of Cain. Because Cain was the first human being to have murder in his heart.
Or, looks, here it is. And while doing this research, I came across a book, which is quite interesting and sheds a new angle on this whole Mark of Cain situation. Now, the book is called The Book of Lamech, Son of Cain. Here it is. So it's the Book of Lamech, Son of Cain. And it's, see, when I see that the author is someone called Demon, or, looks like demon, you've got to be a little bit weary about what's going on here. But from what I've read here in the introduction about the sources of this book, this extra-biblical, apocryphal, pseudepigraphical text, whatever you want to call it, this book that is supposed to fit into the narrative of the Bible as like an extracurricular tale of some kind. You can read that basically this book is now available for all scholars. It's been difficult to secure throughout history, and there are two reasons for this scarcity. Number one, there's a similar book of Lamech about Noah's father. An almost complete copy was found within the Dead Sea Scrolls for this. The second reason is that the church leaders have been and are deeply concerned with the blasphemous history of the antediluvian line of Cain in the Book of Lamech of Cain. So, as this person concluded in the Lost Book of King Og, the suppression of the Book of Lamech of Cain has to do with its disclosures of spiritual truth. The key spiritual knowledge in the Book of Lamech of Cain exposes critical cracks in basic Christian theology, or so this author says. I don't think it really does personally. Father Sargent's translation is at the time the strongest I have read of the original Ugaritic. He has taken some approved liberties, but the overall message of the text comes across well. So this is basically said to have been released from the Vatican very recently. That's where they're saying this book comes from. Okay, so it says here, it was Father Ichabod Sargent who translated this text, and this is his foreword to the book. And he's saying here, the Book of Lamech of Cain that you hold in your hands right now is nothing short of a great antediluvian treasure. When my colleague, Father Esau Martin, was working on his translation of the Lost Book of King Og, he sent me an invitation to meet the lead of his 7-person translation team for dinner, but Father Martin was not present for the meal. At dinner, Father Martin's translators then made his team's services available to me. He then presented me with a briefcase full of microfiche. Those precious rolls would later prove the document of parchment tablets and preserved animal skins of a mostly complete Ugaritic translation of the Book of Lamech of Cain. So, to summarise here, without going too deep into all that, this is a book that's been released and translated and brought to the public in 2019 from the Vatican vaults. Okay, so make of that what you will. Take it all with a pinch of salt. Consider it within context. And obviously, I'm not saying this is the final word of God, what you're going to read here, but it's certainly fascinating to bring into the overall image that we're trying to create. And the things that are shared in this book about the history of what it was like to live in the antediluvian times, I would say within context of when these things were written, it's probably true that it was as brutal and horrible as described in this book. Though there are things that are said in this book which contradict other books, like the Book of Jasher, for example, in regards to things like the death of Tubal-Cain and Cain. This book does contradict that, and also it does give an example that Noah's wife in this book was the daughter of Lamech. Lamech the evil, Lamech the line of Cain, and she was a whore who slept with giants and fallen angels and drank the blood and participated in witchcraft and sorcery. And then she basically hid all of that about herself and married Noah, and she was basically the mother of mankind after the flood. So that obviously that's a reason to for the Vatican alone to reject this and consider it blasphemy. But whether that's true or not, to me, isn't really a salvation issue. But it opens up some interesting questions to consider. So bear that in mind. This is not, so saith the Lord. This is not certified truth necessarily. It's hard to say, but it's definitely worth taking into context and adding into the picture, I would say. So reading this book, I right out of the bat in the first page, it said something which I thought was very interesting in regards to the mark of Cain. So it says here, Cain, the forefather of Lamech, who was marked with leprous whiteness. For God said, whomever slays Cain shall have vengeance visited upon their head sevenfold, as Abel's blood cried from the ground. The same leprous whiteness was made a sign that was visited upon the Cain's descendants, as it was their inheritance for 7 generations. So what it's saying here is the mark of Cain is to have leprous, sickly, white skin, which is interesting. And this is actually interesting that it says this and this has been released recently, because it's funny because in the past I was reading on the Wikipedia page, the whole mark of Cain thing has been used by racists and all sorts of people throughout history to justify the slavery of black people. You know, people used to stupidly say, oh, well, black people are the mark of Cain. You know, black skin is the mark of Cain, which is just outrageous. And in this, it would actually say, well, actually the opposite is true. Having leprous white skin is the mark of Cain. You know, it's interesting. It goes on to explain here. You can read it yourself in the Wikipedia if you want to. But it talks about, you know, the curse of Ham, racism and slavery, blah, 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 and how the mark has been used as justification for slavery, mainly in America as well. But that's neither here nor there. I just find it fascinating, the irony that this supposed antediluvian book is claiming the complete opposite, in fact, that, you know, it's actually it's leprous whiteness. That was the mark. And now why this is relevant to my work and why I've included this and how I've come across this is that I'm trying to obviously come up with biblical descriptions for the Nephilim. Now, if we consider, first of all, that, you know, the Nephilim are the offspring of fallen angels mating with the daughters of Cain in the 6th generation from Jared. Okay. And not only that, obviously, Cain himself mixed himself with the peoples of day 6, the humans that were already on Earth pre-Adam, the pre-Adamites. This is basically the history I'm creating here, you know, from the evidence I've seen, and obviously backing off the work of Gary Wayne. But it seems like when Cain was exiled from the garden, well, from his parents, you know, after killing Abel, he went to build cities and took a wife. And it seems that he may have taken a wife from these peoples that were already around. And it seems like he spread his mark among them, you know. And it's from these people and the daughters produced through Cain's leprous white genetic marker that the fallen angels mated with the humans. You know, and if the fallen angels, which were serpentine seraphim-like in nature, with visages like adders and vipers, as described in the Dead Sea Scrolls Qumran Caves version of the Book of Amran, then that means serpent-like winged beings mated with incredibly porcelain, sickly, white-skinned females who had a mark genetically given to them from the forefather, which was Cain. So this might explain why we always have this common descriptor of the Nephilim having white skin. This could be an answer to why the white skin is such a prolific standard when it comes to describing the Nephilim of the past. And of course, the leprous white skin is a motif of the clowns. They white themselves up, you know, as much as they can before applying the red hair. Red hair also being another indicator of the Nephilim. So it's just fascinating that it's in this book, you know, this mark of Cain was white skin. And it says here, you know, with this marked inheritance, Cain's descendants sought to do all was wicked on the land in the sight of the Lord, for they had been marked by him. For the descendants of Cain had received unto themselves the damnation which was their fair portion for Cain's sin. And God refused to be angered by Cain's wickedness, for Cain was not forgiven. And the descendants of Cain practiced manners of evil that shall not be forgiven unto men. So God ignored the line of Cain, for they were of no use to him. So, you know, this mark that, you know, and anyone who bore the mark for 7 generations, it says here, you know, had this white skin, God just ignored them. He didn't even care about the bad things they were doing. They were basically dead to him for what was done, you know. And, you know, that's maybe a brutal punishment, but that's literally the case. And the rest of the book, you know, goes on to explain how Lamech was born, obviously the 7th generation himself, from there. And he was the last of the leprous white people, basically, from the curse. You know, his daughter after that, Namar, supposedly wasn't marked with the white skin. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, Namar, according to this book, was the one that went on to marry Noah and have obviously give birth to Shem, Japheth, and Ham. But this book also says at the very end, which is quite interesting, if I can get to the last page. Here we go. So it's interesting. So this is coming off the back of the idea that Lamech is basically horrible. He's really upset because his daughter Namar has been whoring around with the sons of God and the giants and drinking blood and doing witchcraft. And he doesn't like watching his daughter being abused and used sexually like this. So it says, Lamech then laid peacefully in the grave. So he's found this hole in the ground. And he's like, I may as well be dead, for my daughter has gone of the ways of the sons of God. He starts basically moping around in this grave, in this hole. And then he says, you know, and when he knew what to tell Namar, he came forth bound hand and foot with grave cloths, and he loosed them and let go of them, for he loved Naamah with his heart and forgave her for all, saying, I will call Naamah a whore no longer, for she will be the last of her kind, and I shall prepare her for it. In all of her fornication with the sons of God, Naamah never conceived, and she was never killed bearing a giant, which was what women did in that time. So that's a fascinating insight. This is where it's saying all the women who, fornicated with fallen angels and gave birth to giants died hideously giving birth to them because they were giants, obviously. But Naamah never came to that. No, Naamah's flesh was then corrupted, for the ways of the sons of God are not man's ways. So it seems like the Nephilim trait, the genetic engineering, was given to Naamah in some way by the fallen angels. But it says here, Naamah eventually put away childish things, and then later she met Noah. Before Noah and Naamah wed, Lamech instructed her not to tell Noah that she had lain with the Nephilim in her youth. Time enough had passed, and Noah did not know of whom Naamah had lain with. For Noah sought a wife that was upright and pure, and Naamah was not those things, and none of those things were available to Noah at the time. Nor was Noah upright and pure, for all was corrupted. So that's obviously a highly contentious thing to say as well. Another reason why this book is not considered canon. And Noah and Naamah had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And this is where it gets interesting. And Ham was the but notice the red hair marker and the beast-like nature. We know that Cain, obviously people have theorized he could have had a horn and been beast-like in nature. And it was said in the book of Jasher that he was slain by Lamech here, who this book is about, and his son Tubal-Cain, as a beast in the field. They mistook him for an animal and shot him with an arrow and killed Cain. Because, like I said, he had an animal-like visage. He was a hairy beast, not unlike, let's say, Esau may have manifested as well. So this goes into all sorts of deep questions and thoughts about, the serpent seed, and the idea that even Cain wasn't actually a child of Adam, but a child of the serpent. Now, I'm not here to say that the serpent was the devil or Satan. It seems like there may have been possibly an upright walking serpentine race around during that time of the Garden of Eden. And, these were the, let's say, children of the Watchers angels, the Seraphim angels, or perhaps just a race that existed during this weird time, the reptilian race, And they had legs and arms and appendages and walked upright. And it seems like it was those who talked to Eve and convinced them that, they can eat of the fruit, partake of the knowledge type of thing. And the curse was to then wander on their belly and eat dust, which is interesting because it implies that they're having their limbs removed, But who knows? Who knows on that? That's all wild, pure speculation as to what the serpent was exactly. But people have argued that, the real issue there was that Eve got pregnant by the serpent and then gave birth to Cain, And it was only until Abel was born did Adam say, I've had a son in my own image made, which is interesting. But again, we can't fully know that. But it's interesting that it was said, as punishment, that God would put enmity between the woman's seed and the serpent's seed. And the serpent will bite the heel, but, the woman's seed will bruise its head. And it's this idea that there'll be this eternal struggle between the serpent, people though who have the serpent mark within them, and those who, are of pure blood, basically, of pure human in nature. Now, I don't know if that still goes on today, because obviously the flood, the whole point of that was to wipe out that corruption and start from scratch. But this whole book of Lamech here brings forth the notion that it was Noah's wife who continued the corruption after the flood, and then through the line of Ham. But it was recessive then. It didn't appear in all humans. Only, obviously, out of the 3 sons, it was Ham, and then he went on from there. So it's just food for thought. Like I said, this is a rumination. I don't have definitive answers here. But the main takeaway from this is that the mark of Cain, if it was leprous whiteness during this antediluvian time, now this isn't Caucasian white skin. I'm talking vampire white, deathly white, ghostly white, like a dead body type of white. Then this might be an indicator as how the Nephilim had white skin and red hair themselves. If Esau had red hair and he is of the serpent lineage, then it's possible Cain also had the same fiery red hair inherited from the fallen angels. And the leprous white skin marker, the white skin red hair, is obviously a clown motif. That's how it's relevant to my book. Could it be a possible answer as how we have the white skin? I mean, if I go to my book here, say something like this, if I can find it. So the base image we're sculpting here for the Nephilim form is now partly coming into focus. According to biblical sources, the Nephilim were incredibly tall monsters with booming voices that distilled fear into whoever heard them. Their countenance was terrifying to witness, and their bodies were shaped unlike anything else that is, or ever has been on the face of the earth. They had extra fingers and extra toes. Though it's not made clear what the dexterous advantages of this deformity would have been, in a modern context, I imagine the words per minute typing speed was incredible. Through extra-biblical sources, we can read that they also had brilliant and sickly white skin, with the colour red, and possibly other colours, patterned throughout, like a reptile, or other brightly coloured animal. They also had hair that may have been white like Noah, or crimson and red like Esau. Finally, just like Noah was described again, they had large eyes that glowed, possibly through a form of bioluminescence, divine power, or simple reflectivity. As discussed in previous chapters, mankind did change themselves to be like Nephilim, by mixing themselves with animals. The forms these beasts took would have been innumerable, and many of these abominations, along with the giant offspring of fallen angels, were considered gods among men. So just to clarify there, when Noah was born, according to the Book of Enoch, his father Lamech, so this is the good Lamech, was terrified because he thought he had given birth to a Nephilim. Or he thought his wife had given birth to an angel child from the Nephilim, from the Watchers. So, however, but this isn't the case. Noah was divine and fine and normal. He was just divine in nature because he was going to be the future of mankind, I think. But the way he's described must be similar to the Nephilim, if his father Lamech was terrified that is what had happened, And Noah's described as having red and white patterned skin with immaculate white curly hair and glowing eyes. So the serpent, so again, it must be that the Nephilim also had glowing eyes, brightly coloured hair, and also this white and red pattern on the skin. Interesting. But obviously I do think the Nephilim version was much darker and twisted and more mangled like a beast, rather than looking divine and lovely and brilliant to see, which obviously was the difference between God's lineage and the cursed lineage. But yeah, interesting thoughts there.
Are probably familiar with is this. This is the modern day Hebrew Tav. But before, during the time of Ezekiel, it was two lines crossing each other, a cross. The word Tav means sign, omen, seal, or a mark. If you were to dive into some of the rabbit holes that exist around this, you may run into some very wild theories, such as that Cain actually killed his brother Abel and then ate him. In the Hebrew gematria, the word cannibal comes from Cain ate Abel. Crazy, right? So is this mark also the mark of evil, the mark of the murderer, the mark of the liar? The Hebrew word oath, which is the word mark, would mean a sign or omen, remembrance, a warning sign. The Greek interpretation also means a physical marking that would let people know who he was when they saw him. You are probably
Hey, before Edomites were born.
So what it's saying here is the mark of Cain is to have leprous, sickly, white skin.